quiet suburban street glowed under soft streetlights, the kind of place where people believed nothing bad ever happened. Parked at the center of it all was a black $400,000 luxury car, polished like a mirror, resting proudly in front of a modest home. It wasn't just a car. It was a man's testimony, a man's journey, a man's proof that he earned a place in a world that once told him he never would. But tonight, that symbol was about to face something uglier than rust or age. It was about to face entitlement wearing sneakers. Three teenage boys moved through the shadows with the confidence of kids who believed their last names were shields. Chad, the ringleader, circled the car with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Look at this, he really thinks he belongs here." Logan flipped open a lighter, its flame dancing like it enjoyed the attention. "Let's remind him he doesn't." Eli hesitated, shifting nervously. "My dad's gonna freak out if we get caught." Chad laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "We won't, nobody listens to him anyway." A gas can tilted. Fuel slithered across the street like a living thing, moving under the car's body, waiting. Logan lowered the flame. A burst of fire exploded upward, licking the hood, then racing along the lines of the car like it had been starving for years. The beautiful black paint bubbled. Glass cracked. The fire grew loud, bright, wild. The boys stepped back, their smirks melting as fast as the metal. Across the street, a front door flew open. A tall black man sprinted out, barefoot, breathless, still half asleep. Marcus Hawkins, 28, disciplined, soft-spoken, and now broken. He stumbled toward the blaze instinctively, but the heat forced him to stop. His eyes widened, filled with disbelief, then heartbreak. He dropped to his knees as his dream disintegrated in front of him, piece by piece. The bullies froze. Not out of remorse, but because, for the first time, they felt afraid. They thought they were just burning a car belonging to someone who didn't matter. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know who his father was. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that tonight, everything would change. Hours before the fire, Marcus Hawkins woke up before the sun. He always did. Discipline wasn't a habit for him, it was survival. He brewed his coffee, reviewed his case files, and dressed in a suit far simpler than the job he was slowly growing into. Most neighbors assumed he worked some average office job. None of them knew he spent his days fighting for families on the edge of being forgotten. Marcus stepped outside and locked his front door, pausing to admire the black car parked in the driveway. It had cost him almost everything, not because he cared about luxury, but because it represented something he'd never had before, a win. A reminder that he'd earned a seat at tables where people once pretended not to see him. As he walked to the car, the older Latina woman next door, Mrs. Alvarez, waved from her porch. "Morning, Marcus, you're up early again." Marcus smiled gently. "Duty doesn't wait." She laughed softly. "You work too hard, but you help so many people, don't think we don't see it." Marcus appreciated that. Some days he felt invisible, other days he wished he were. He drove off, unaware that a few houses down, three teenage boys stood by their own driveway, watching him with quiet contempt. Chad, Logan, and Eli. Boys raised in comfort but starved of empathy. Boys who didn't like the sight of a young black man living on their street with a car nicer than their father's. Logan muttered, "There he goes, doesn't even look at us, acts like he owns the place." Chad scoffed, "Doesn't matter, people like him can buy fancy stuff, but they'll never actually fit in." Eli didn't speak. He just watched Marcus drive away with a sinking feeling in his stomach, a feeling he tried to ignore. Marcus arrived at the civil rights office downtown, carrying his worn briefcase. Inside, he met a family he'd been helping for weeks, a Nigerian mother and her two young kids facing an eviction based on fabricated complaints from their landlord. Marcus knelt to speak to the little boy at eye level. "You're gonna be all right, I promise." The mother's voice trembled. "You fight for us like we're your own." Marcus smiled softly but didn't respond. Fighting for others came naturally. Fighting for himself was harder. Back in his office, Marcus stared at a framed picture of a young man, his best friend, Jordan, who had been killed in a racially charged altercation years ago. That loss pushed Marcus into law, into justice, into places where truth wasn't welcomed but desperately needed. He whispered under his breath, "Still trying, brother." a small ritual he did every morning. Meanwhile, his father, Attorney General Elijah Hawkins, stood in a towering office lined with awards, flags, and leather-bound books. He was a man respected by many, feared by others, and deeply misunderstood. To most, he was a symbol of power. To Marcus, he was a complicated shadow, a father who loved him but showed it through pressure rather than presence. Elijah stared at a picture on his desk, Marcus at his law school graduation. A proud moment hidden behind years of emotional distance. He whispered, "One day, son, you'll understand." Back in the neighborhood, subtle tension floated through the air. Marcus had moved in only 6 months ago, but not everyone welcomed him. Some neighbors pretended to be friendly, waving with forced smiles. Others peeked through curtains, suspicious, judgmental. One afternoon, while polishing his car, a middle-aged white man walked by with his dog and said, "Nice car. Surprised insurance even approves someone well, someone young to drive it." Marcus heard the pause, the implied meaning. He swallowed it quietly. "Hard work pays for a lot of things," he replied calmly. The man chuckled. "Sure, well, welcome to the neighborhood. Hope you last." Marcus had heard versions of that his entire life, subtle reminders that he didn't quite belong. Yet he chose to stay, chose to rise above it, chose dignity over confrontation. That evening, Marcus sat at his small dining table, typing notes for a discrimination case. He lived alone, not because he wanted to, but because trust came hard for him. His life was built on caution, on knowing that one misstep could undo years of effort. His phone buzzed, a message from his father. "Call me when you have time." Marcus looked at it, then set the phone down. "Not tonight." Instead, he went outside to wipe down his car once more. The street was quiet, the sky faintly purple, the wind gentle. He ran his hand along the hood, whispering, "You were never about showing off. You were about surviving." What Marcus didn't know was that down the street, those same 3 boys were plotting something stupid, something reckless, something rooted in jealousy disguised as humor. Chad pointed toward Marcus's house. "He drives that thing like he's better than us. Let's humble him." Eli whispered, "It's just a joke, right?" Logan smirked. "Yeah, a joke he won't forget." Their plan formed in whispers, a plan born from entitlement and fueled by resentment. But Marcus, unaware of the storm forming in the shadows, went inside with the hope that tomorrow would be better than today. He didn't know that within hours, his life, his peace, and everything he thought he had control over would be tested. He closed his curtains, turned off his lights, and allowed himself for once to sleep with a small smile. A man like Marcus rarely let himself feel safe. And that was the night they chose to take it from him. The night before the fire, the neighborhood felt unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks. The street was quiet, trimmed with manicured lawns and houses that all looked identical. But behind one of those doors, 3 teenage boys were growing restless. Chad paced his bedroom with a smirk that bordered on cruel amusement. He thrived on chaos. His family's wealth had always shielded him from consequences. Every punishment ended with a warning, every wrong forgiven with a donation. The world had taught him one lesson: there was always someone else to blame. Logan sat on the floor, spinning a lighter between his fingers as if testing fate. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, though his grin showed he wasn't hoping for a no. Chad scoffed. "Absolutely, that guy thinks he's some big shot, pulls up in that car every day like he owns the block." Logan shrugged. "He kinda does own it. That car is nicer than my dad's." Chad's eyes narrowed. "Exactly, and that's the problem. People like him, they show off to make us look bad." Eli sat on the edge of the bed, quiet, chewing the inside of his cheek. His conscience tugged at him, louder this time. He had never been as bold as the other 2. His parents raised him better than this. But peer pressure had a terrifying way of swallowing morals. "We're not really hurting him, right? Just sending a message." Chad laughed. "It's just a prank, man. Relax." But Eli's stomach twisted. Something told him this wasn't a joke. Something told him it would end badly. Across the street, Marcus lay in bed, unaware of the storm forming. His dreams were interrupted by everything he carried during the day, the families he fought for, the injustices he witnessed, the pressure of living up to his father's expectations. Yet beneath all that weight, he held onto a fragile hope, that this neighborhood, this home, this fresh start would finally be peaceful. Earlier that evening, he had parked his car like he always did, closing the door gently as if it were alive. He didn't see Chad watching from his bedroom window. He didn't hear the boys whispering. He didn't know that envy had turned into resentment, and resentment was slowly turning into something darker. Hours passed, midnight came. The boys stepped out of their houses, meeting at the end of the street like they had rehearsed it. Eli walked slower than the others, arms folded, shivering even though the night wasn't cold. Logan clutched the lighter, flicking it open and closed. "You ready?" Chad nodded toward Marcus's house. There it is, the king's chariot. They moved through the shadows, avoiding the light, hearts beating fast but for very different reasons. Chad walked with arrogance, Logan with thrill, Eli with dread. At Marcus's house, all lights were off. He had fallen asleep on his couch, case files scattered across the table. He had no idea danger was creeping closer with every step. The boys stopped at the driveway. The car sat under the street lamp, its black paint glowing like a mirror. Even in the dark, it looked surreal, elegant, powerful. A car that took years of sacrifice to earn. A car that didn't belong to some spoiled kid, but to a man who had clawed his way to success. Chad sneered. "Look at this thing. He probably thinks he's better than us." Eli whispered, "He's literally never bothered us." Chad ignored him. "We'll humble him." He pulled out the small gas can he stole from his father's garage. Logan looked impressed. Eli looked terrified. Chad knelt beside the car, unscrewing the cap. The smell hit them instantly, sharp, unmistakable. He tilted the can, letting the gasoline spill slowly, deliberately, like he was drawing a line between respect and ruin. Eli stepped backward. "Chad, stop. This is stupid. This is way too much." Chad hissed. "Then leave." But Eli stayed, because fear, not courage, glued him to the ground. The gasoline crept beneath the car, snaking its way under the engine. Logan crouched down, fascinated, as if this were some twisted science experiment. Chad smiled wickedly. "Light it." Logan flicked the lighter. A small flame danced on the metal tip. Eli whispered, "Don't, please, this isn't funny anymore." Chad stepped closer to Eli, his voice venomous. "Shut up, or I swear I'll tell everyone you bylaid. You want to be the loser, or you want to be with us." Eli felt the familiar sting, the fear of being excluded, ridiculed, humiliated. He whispered, barely audible, "Just do it and let's go." Logan brought the flame lower. And in that instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. When the flame touched the gasoline trail, fire didn't start slow. It erupted. A sudden burst, a fast crawl, then a violent surge. The fire shot upward, clinging to the sides of the car like living anger. The boys stumbled backward, shocked. Chad's cocky grin fell apart. "Whoa, okay, that was supposed to be smaller." The flames grew faster, hotter, hungrier. Logan's face twisted into fear. "Dude, did we just..." Eli's voice cracked into panic. "We have to do something, we have to stop it." But it was too late. The fire roared higher, reflecting in their wide, terrified eyes. Inside the house, Marcus shot awake. Something was wrong, something smelled wrong, something glowed wrong. He sprinted to the window. His breath stopped. His heart collapsed. His car, the one thing he'd ever allowed himself to be proud of, was engulfed in flames. He ran out of the house barefoot, stumbling down the steps, eyes locked on the blazing inferno. He reached the driveway, but the heat pushed him back. The flames were too high, too strong, too loud. His hands shook uncontrollably, his chest tightened. He dropped to his knees. "No, no." The boys froze, unable to move, watching him break, watching him crumble in a way they had never seen an adult crumble before. Marcus's shoulders shook. Tears streamed down his face, illuminated by the fire that was devouring his dream. Everything he worked for, everything he sacrificed, everything he poured himself into burning in front of him. He whispered to the fire as if trying to bargain. "Please, please stop." But fire doesn't negotiate. Logan's voice trembled. He came out. Oh my God, he came out. Chad grabbed Logan's sleeve. "We need to run." But Eli didn't move. Eli stared at Marcus, at the raw pain, the loss, the devastation, and something inside him changed. His voice cracked. "Chad, we did this. We actually did this." Chad snapped. "Shut up." Marcus covered his face with both hands, sobbing into his palms, shaking violently. He wasn't crying over a car. He was crying over years of struggle, of fighting to belong, of trying to build a life where he could finally breathe. And now someone had taken that from him in seconds. He whispered into the night. Why do they keep doing this? Why? He didn't know who they were yet, but he knew it wasn't an accident. The boys stood frozen, haunted by the sight of a grown man breaking. Eli whispered, "We have to tell someone." Chad grabbed his arm. "No one says anything. We disappear now." They ran into the shadows, disappearing between houses, leaving Marcus alone with the burning symbol of his achievements. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that consequences were already coming for them, faster than they could run. And everything was about to change. The fire was still hissing when Jordan came running back out of the store, a bag of water bottles in his hand and confusion on his face. Confusion that froze the moment he saw the flames licking up the side of his car. His breath left him. His knees nearly buckled. For a second, the world around him went completely silent. Across the lot, the three boys, Chase, Milo, and Trent, were laughing, filming, and bragging. They didn't even look up as Jordan sprinted toward the burning car. They had no idea who he was. They had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea their entire lives were about to tilt. Jordan grabbed the store's fire extinguisher and threw himself at the flames. People gathered, whispering, staring, pointing phones. But no one stepped in. He fought the fire alone, breathing hard, jaw clenched, eyes burning not from the smoke, but from the humiliation of being watched while something he worked 10 years for was turned to ashes for someone else's entertainment. When the flames finally died, Jordan stood there panting, soot covering his shirt, hands shaking. The crowd murmured. The boys smirked. "Yo," Milo called out loudly. "Chill, man. It's just a car. You can buy another one if you stopped acting broke." Laughter. Snickering. A few gasps. Jordan didn't respond. He just stared at them, quiet, steady, unreadable. That made the boys angrier. Bullies hate silence. It forces them to face themselves. Chase strutted forward, chest puffed. "What, you gonna cry, or you gonna call your gang? That what you people do, right?" Jordan blinked slowly. His voice came out low. "You really don't know what you just did." Chase scoffed. "Oh, I know exactly what I did. Gave this parking lot a little show." The store manager finally rushed out, waving his arms, yelling something about the police. That word, police, made the boys stiffen for half a second. But Chase recovered fast, smirking again as he held up his phone. "Now we good. We recorded everything. My uncle's a sheriff. Nothing's happening to us." Jordan looked at him with a calmness that didn't match the moment. "We'll see." That calmness felt dangerous. Chase felt it too. His smirk flickered. The manager tried to ask questions, but Jordan ignored him. He crouched beside what was left of his matte black luxury car, touching the metal as if he was touching the ruins of a memory. His father bought him that car the day he passed the bar exam. A gift, a promise, a symbol, and now it was a pile of twisted, burnt metal, destroyed by boys who treated his life as a joke. But Jordan didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't even raise his voice. He simply pulled out his phone and made one short call. "Dad, I need you to come." His tone was calm, but underneath it something sharp was rising. Chase elbowed Milo. "Who's he calling? His cousin?" "Probably," Milo snorted. "They always got someone." But Trent wasn't laughing anymore. Something in his face had changed when he saw the look in Jordan's eyes. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't." "Bro, relax," Chase snapped. "He's no one." But he was. And that was the problem. 10 minutes later, a black SUV rolled into the lot with a presence that made conversations stop mid-sentence. The doors opened, and out stepped a man in a tailored navy suit, tall, composed, and carrying an authority that made the air tighten. Attorney General Jonathan Miles. Jordan's father. The boys went pale instantly. Milo's phone slipped from his hand. Trent took a step back, and for the first time since the fire started, Chase's mouth didn't move. Jonathan walked straight to his son. examined the burnt car, then slowly turned toward the boys. "Jordan," he said quietly, "tell me everything." Jordan didn't point, didn't accuse, he just said. "They lit it and they filmed it." Jonathan's eyes shifted to the boys, calm, cold, precise. "Is that true?" The boys tried to speak. Words tangled. Excuses clogged their throats. Chase stuttered something about a prank. Milo tried to blame Trent. Trent just froze. Jonathan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Gentlemen," he said, "you didn't just commit vandalism, you committed arson, a felony, and you recorded it." Chase swallowed hard. His face lost all color. Jonathan stepped closer. "And you did it to my son." Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Crushing. "No more laughing now?" Jonathan asked quietly. Chase's knees shook. Milo whispered, "We're dead." Jonathan turned to Jordan. "You okay?" Jordan nodded once. "I'm fine." But fine wasn't the point anymore. Justice was. And this, right now, was the moment the boys realized the truth. They didn't just pick the wrong man. They picked the absolute worst one they could have chosen. The man whose family the law itself protected. The man whose son they had just committed a felony against. And the man who had the full power to make sure every consequence caught up to them. The parking lot felt colder now, as if everyone could sense that something heavier than smoke was hanging in the air. The boys were no longer loud, no longer joking, no longer holding their phones like shields. They stood in a crooked line, faces pale, eyes darting between Jordan and his father and the charred remains of the car that was no longer just a car. It was evidence now. It was a crime scene. Jonathan glanced around at the crowd forming, then looked at the store manager. "I'm going to need your security footage." The manager nodded quickly, almost tripping over himself to lead the attorney general inside. The title alone made people step aside without being asked. But Jordan didn't follow. He stayed right where he was, staring at the boys, the weight of everything finally settling in. For years, he had learned to ignore the small slights, the casual racism, the whispers about what someone like him should or shouldn't have. But this went beyond ignorance or disrespect. This was cruelty. This was entitlement mixed with hatred, mixed with boredom, mixed with the belief that they would never face consequences. And the sickest part, they probably wouldn't have if he were anyone else. Jordan felt his throat tighten with something he didn't want to admit. Frustration, anger, but beneath it there was exhaustion, tired of proving himself, tired of being the exception, tired of being the one who had to stay calm while others destroyed what he built. And now the boys could finally see it in his eyes. He wasn't calm anymore. Chase took a shaky step forward, trying to salvage the last bit of the swagger he had left. "Yo, look, we didn't know. Okay, chill, we're sorry." Jordan stared at him. "You're sorry I turned out to be someone your parents fear, not sorry for what you did." Chase opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Milo tugged on his sleeve. "Just shut up, dude." Trent kept looking at Jordan with something close to guilt, but he still didn't speak. Jonathan returned from inside the store holding a USB drive. The footage, proof, receipts that no attorney, no family connection, no privilege could erase. "Jordan," he said, "I want your statement for the official report." Jordan nodded and followed his father toward the SUV, but his steps were slow, heavy, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Jonathan noticed, "What is it?" Jordan hesitated. "Dad, do you ever get tired of being calm?" Jonathan stopped. The question was unexpected, and it hit deeper than he showed. "Every day," he said quietly. "But I learned a long time ago that our calm is mistaken for weakness, right up until the moment the truth speaks for us." Jordan absorbed the words, and something in him steadied, not softened but focused. Behind them, the boys huddled together, whispering frantically. "What do we do?" Milo hissed. "We're screwed," Trent whispered. "My uncle can fix this," Chase insisted, but he didn't believe it. For the first time in their lives, the boys felt what real consequences looked like. When Jordan finished giving his statement, Jonathan walked back toward them. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was sharp enough to cut the tension like glass. "All of you," he said, "will sit down." The boys didn't dare argue. They sat right where they stood on the curb, hands clasped, eyes lowered. Not because they respected him, but because they feared him. Jonathan paced slowly, like a professor examining three failing students. You destroyed private property, he began, worth nearly $500,000. You used an accelerant, you filmed it, and you targeted someone entirely at random simply because you thought you were untouchable. Chase looked up. We didn't target him because of you know. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Because of what? Chase swallowed. Nothing. Jonathan let the silence do the teaching. Your actions were not a prank, he continued. They were premeditated, dangerous, malicious. If that fire had spread even slightly, you could have injured or killed someone. Milo's voice cracked. We didn't mean for it to get that big. And that, Jonathan replied, is the problem. You boys understand fire as a joke, but you don't understand what it means to burn. Jordan watched from a distance, caught between anger and a strange sense of sadness. These boys had probably walked through life believing the world bent for them, believing consequences were for other people. Now the world was bending back. Jonathan faced them again. There will be charges: arson, reckless endangerment, destruction of property. Chase gasped. Wait, charges like actual charges? We're kids. You're nearly 17, Jonathan answered. Old enough to commit a felony, old enough to understand right and wrong. Trent's breathing quickened, his hands shook. Sir, please, my mom, she'll freak out. Jonathan looked at him for a long moment. She should. Then he turned to Jordan. Son, is there anything you want to say to them before we move forward? Jordan's gaze swept across the boys. Their fear, their regret, their sudden realization of the world they had never seen before this moment. Yes, he said quietly. The boys looked up. You think I'm lucky my dad is who he is, Jordan said. But the truth is, I'm lucky I lived long enough to get here despite people like you. Chase's face crumpled. You're not sorry you burned my car, Jordan continued. You're sorry the world finally told you no. The boys blinked fast, as if his words hit harder than the legal consequences. Jordan stepped back and took a slow breath. Jonathan nodded at his son, not in approval of vengeance, but in recognition of truth spoken honestly. As they prepared to leave, a police cruiser arrived. The officer stepped out, saw Jonathan, and straightened immediately. Sir, he said, we received the call. Jonathan handed him the USB drive. Everything you need is on this. The officer nodded grim, then he turned to the boys. All three of you stand up. They stood trembling. But before anything else could happen, a loud car screeched to a halt at the edge of the lot. A woman jumped out, hair messy, eyes wild. Chase's mother. She ran toward them, pointing at Jordan and screaming. You set them up. My son is a good boy. He would never do something like this. Everyone froze. Jordan's jaw tightened. Jonathan stepped forward. Ma'am, your son committed arson. No, she snapped. He would not, Chase. He's just a child. Children don't carry lighters and accelerants, Jonathan answered calmly. But the woman wasn't listening. She marched straight up to Jordan, eyes blazing with entitlement and misplaced fury. You people always exaggerate, always play the victim. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The officer stepped in instantly, blocking her. Ma'am, step back. Jordan didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't let anger take over. He simply looked at her the same way he looked at the fire. With quiet, controlled disappointment. And that, not the badge, not the law, was what made her hesitate. Jonathan's voice came in low behind her. You should be very careful about the next words you choose, because they will determine whether you leave here as a witness or as an accessory. Her lips parted, the color drained from her face. And for the first time, she went silent. Jordan exhaled, slow, controlled. But he knew this was just the beginning. The boys had been caught, but they hadn't learned anything yet. Consequences were coming. But so was truth. And truth always demanded more than punishment. It demanded change. And that part of the story hadn't even begun. The officer gently pushed Chase's mother back toward the curb, but she kept glaring at Jordan as if he had personally destroyed her world. Not her son's actions, not the fire, not the crime, just him, standing there, black, calm, unshaken. Entitlement couldn't understand dignity. Privilege couldn't understand restraint. And she couldn't understand how her son's choices had brought them here. Chase looked at her with desperate eyes. "Mom, stop, please." But she didn't stop. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting the version of him she had believed in. The version that could do no wrong. The version the world supposedly owed forgiveness to. Jonathan stepped closer. "Ma'am, if you'd like to speak to an attorney, I suggest you do so calmly. Your son will be taken in for processing along with the others." The word processing snapped something inside her. She spun toward the officer. "You're not arresting my son." The officer remained steady. "Ma'am, there is video evidence. He's a minor, still responsible for the crime." "No, no, no," her voice cracked as she grabbed Chase's arm. "Sweetheart, tell them this is a misunderstanding." But Chase couldn't talk, couldn't even look at her. His entire body was shaking. Jordan watched silently. He didn't enjoy seeing anyone break, but he also knew the truth. Some people don't change until the cost finally hits home. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, step aside now." She hesitated, breathing heavily, then moved back just enough for the officer to speak to the boys. Chase, Milo, Trent. All three stood with their hands visible, their bravado gone. The officer took out zip-tie cuffs, and panic flashed across their faces. "Please," Trent whispered. "I didn't even want to do it. I told them to stop." Jonathan looked at him calmly. "And did you stop them?" Trent's mouth opened, then closed. His guilt pressed down so hard it made his shoulders hunch. "No," Jonathan said, "you didn't." The officer secured the cuffs on Trent first. Trent didn't resist, didn't argue. He just stared at Jordan with something like apology, but apologies after the damage were just shadows, too late to catch the fire. Milo was next, his voice trembled. "Sir, can I call my dad? He knows people. He'll fix this. He always fixes things." Jonathan shook his head. "Not this time." Milo's face collapsed. His world had been built on a cushion of protection, and now that cushion was gone. Responsibility felt like a foreign language. Then came Chase, the ringleader, the one whose voice had started the fire long before the lighter did. The officer reached for him, but Chase backed up. "No, no, wait, please, I'm sorry, okay? I swear I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." Jordan's voice broke the air. "You meant every second of it." Chase froze. "You burned my car because you thought it was funny," Jordan continued, his voice steady. "Because you thought people like me don't belong in cars like that." "No," Chase whispered, "that's not." "Don't lie now, not when it finally matters." Chase's breathing became ragged. "I didn't know you were." "Someone important," Jordan finished for him. "You didn't need to know that. Respect shouldn't depend on status." Jonathan stepped beside his son, not saying anything, just standing with him, just supporting him, a silent shield. Chase's mother pleaded again. "Jonathan, please, you can't do this. He's just young, he makes mistakes." Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "And what would you have said if my son had burned your child's car?" She swallowed, looked away, didn't answer. Silence again. The officer finally placed the cuffs on Chase, who didn't fight anymore. His courage had melted away the second he realized privilege had an expiration date. As the officer led the boys toward the patrol car, a small crowd gathered, whispering, filming. Jonathan noticed and turned to the officer. "No media exposure, they're minors." The officer nodded. "We'll block the plates, keep their faces out of the reports." Chase's mother broke into tears. Not graceful tears, not soft tears, but the raw panic of someone watching the illusion of control crumble. Jordan watched her, then looked at the boys locked inside the car, shoulders slumped, faces pressed against the windows. And for a moment, just a moment, Jordan felt something unexpected. Pity. Not because they didn't deserve consequences. Not because they were innocent. But because they had lived so long without understanding the weight of their choices, that the crash landing was inevitable. Jonathan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You okay?" Jordan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I didn't expect it to feel like this." "What do you mean?" Jordan looked back at the boys. "I thought justice would feel satisfying." "And it does." Jordan exhaled. "It feels heavy." Jonathan understood more than anyone. Justice was never clean, never simple, not when real people were involved, not when pain mixed with truth. The patrol car pulled away. leaving behind a silence so thick it felt like the aftermath of a storm. The store manager came running over. "Mr. Attorney General, sir, do you need anything else? The footage, the witness statements, anything." Jonathan shook his head. "Thank you, we'll handle the rest." The manager nodded nervously and retreated. Jordan walked back toward the burned car. The smell still lingered, sharp and bitter. He placed his hand on the ruined hood one last time. He whispered, mostly to himself, "Dad bought me this car the day I passed the bar." Jonathan stepped beside him. "I remember. He told me it was a reminder that I earned my place." Jonathan's voice softened. "You did, and you still do." Jordan blinked hard, swallowing emotions he didn't want to show. "And today," Jonathan added quietly, "you taught them something they needed to learn." "Did I?" Jordan asked. "You taught them that your worth isn't up for debate," Jonathan replied, "and that actions have consequences even for them." Jordan nodded slowly. But then something shifted in the air. A new car pulled up at the edge of the lot, a sleek silver sedan Jordan didn't recognize. A man stepped out, tall, stern, wearing a sheriff's uniform. Chase's uncle, the one the boys bragged about. His presence sent a ripple through the air. He didn't look confused. He didn't look shocked. He looked angry, furious, with a fury aimed not at the boys, but at Jordan and Jonathan. He walked toward them with heavy steps, jaw tight. "Jonathan," he said coldly, "I got a call that my nephew was arrested and that your son was involved." Jonathan's expression didn't change. "Your nephew committed a felony." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "I don't care what he did. You should have called me before letting some rookie slap cuffs on him." Jordan's stomach tightened. This wasn't just justice versus crime anymore. It was politics. Power. A system built on connections, threats, and favors. The sheriff stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You really think I'm going to let my own blood get booked, charged? You know how this works, Jonathan." Jonathan met his glare calmly. "Yes, I do. It works with the law." "That's not what I meant," the sheriff growled. Jordan felt something cold in his gut. The sheriff continued, eyes locked on Jonathan. "You want to play hero today? Fine, but I promise you this will come back around." Jordan stepped forward before he could think. "Are you threatening him?" The sheriff snapped his gaze toward Jordan. "I'm telling him the truth, something you clearly don't understand." Jordan clenched his fists. "Your nephew set my car on fire." "And," the sheriff barked, "you're alive, aren't you? It was a car." Jonathan placed a hand in front of Jordan, signaling him to stay calm. But the sheriff wasn't done. "You're dragging 3 boys through the system over property," he sneered. "And why? Because you people love drama." Jordan flinched. The words hit like a slap. Not loud, but sharp, measured, designed to wound quietly. Jonathan's face didn't move, but his eyes hardened. The sheriff stepped closer. "Drop the charges now or this gets ugly." Jordan stared at him. The entitlement, the arrogance, the casual racism, the assumption that they should fear him. Jordan had faced bullies before. He had faced racism before. But this was different. This was the system itself, standing in front of him, threatening his father. Jonathan finally spoke. "You're right about one thing." The sheriff lifted his chin, smug. "This is going to get ugly," Jonathan finished. Jordan felt a chill. Because this was no longer just about a car. Or 3 boys. Or a fire. This was about power. About truth. About a system that had always expected people like him to stay quiet. But Jordan wasn't quiet anymore. And neither was his father. The night felt heavy, almost unnatural. The street outside Layla's small apartment was quiet, too quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic and the buzzing of a lone street lamp flickering like it was nervous. Inside, the entire room pulsed with tension thick enough to choke on. Layla stood frozen near the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she stared at Mr. Knight, still dressed in his crisp suit, but his face darkened with an expression she had never seen from him before. A raw storm was swirling in his eyes. Across from him, the apartment door rattled like it wanted to break off its hinges. And outside that door was Marcus, Caden's biological father, pounding, shouting, spitting threats like a man with nothing to lose. Caden clung to Layla's leg, shaking, his small fingers digging into her skin. "Mommy, I'm scared." Layla bent down and hugged him tightly, whispering into his hair. "It's okay, baby. I promise nothing's gonna happen to you." But even her own voice cracked when she said it. Another thunderous bang. "Layla," Marcus roared, "open this damn door. I know you're in there, and I know he's in there too." He meant Caden. Mr. Knight took a slow step forward, placing his body between Layla and the door, his jaw clenched with a fire that was almost frightening. He spoke low, with a quiet authority that didn't need volume to threaten. "Layla, take Caden to the bedroom. Lock the door. I'm not leaving you here alone." "You're not," he said firmly. "You'll be behind that wall, that's close enough." Another slam shook the entire frame, and something inside Layla broke. She grabbed Caden and rushed him into the bedroom, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the key while locking the door. Caden climbed onto the bed, burying his face in a pillow to hide from the shouting outside. Layla pressed her ear to the wall, trying to hear what was happening in the living room. Mr. Knight stood perfectly still, facing the door like a soldier facing an incoming bullet. His calm was terrifying. "Marcus," he said loudly, "step away from the door. You're not coming inside." The response was pure venom. "Who are you to tell me anything? This is MY family. That's MY son. Now open this damn door before I break it down." "You've never acted like he was your son," Mr. Knight said, voice steady. "You abandoned him. You abandoned Layla. You don't get to storm in and destroy them just because your pride is hurt." "Open the door," Marcus barked again, louder, angrier, like an animal cornered. And then, suddenly, everything fell silent. The pause made Layla's skin crawl. Then came the sound of metal scraping. Marcus was trying to force the lock. Layla gasped and covered her mouth. Caden whimpered softly. The next moments unfolded like slow-motion tragedy. Mr. Knight took off his suit jacket, folded it neatly on the chair, and rolled up his sleeves. He looked almost heartbreakingly calm, like a man who had accepted that he needed to stand between a monster and the people he cared about. Then a deafening crack. The doorframe splintered. The lock gave. Marcus burst inside like a storm of rage and alcohol and desperation. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, unfocused. "What you doing in MY house?" he shouted as he swung blindly at Mr. Knight. The punch never landed. Mr. Knight stepped aside, lightning quick but controlled, catching Marcus's arm mid-swing and twisting it behind his back with a force that made Marcus grunt in pain. "This isn't your house," Mr. Knight said, "and you're not taking another step toward that child." Marcus snarled and shoved backward, slamming Mr. Knight into the wall. The impact echoed like a gunshot through the tiny apartment. Layla flinched so hard she nearly cried out. But Mr. Knight pushed off the wall with surprising strength, grabbing Marcus by the front of his shirt and dragging him away from the hallway. "You need to calm down," Mr. Knight warned. "Or what?" Marcus spit back. "You think you can replace me? You think you can walk in here, play hero, and take what's mine?" Mr. Knight's voice dropped. "No one wants to replace you, but you're trying to hurt them, and I won't let that happen." That set Marcus off like gasoline on fire. He lunged. This time, the fight became chaotic, messy, real. The two men crashed into the small coffee table, sending glass shattering across the floor. They struggled, gripping, shoving, trying to overpower each other. Marcus swung wildly, fueled by fury, but Mr. Knight fought with purpose, controlled, strategic, protective. Layla squeezed her hands against her mouth to stop a scream from ripping out of her chest. Every crash made her heart feel like it was going to burst. Marcus grabbed a bottle from the kitchen counter, smashing it against the edge until it broke into jagged shards. "Oh God, no," Layla whispered through the wall. Mr. Knight held up his hands, stepping back. "Put that down, Marcus. Don't do something you can't undo." "Don't tell me what to do," Marcus shouted, waving the broken glass toward him. "I will not lose my son to some rich corporate clown." "He's not losing you," Mr. Knight said quietly, "but you're losing yourself." Those words struck deeper than any punch. Marcus's hand trembled. Just for a moment. Then he charged. Mr. Knight sidestepped again, grabbed Marcus's wrist, and twisted it with enough force to make the glass fall from his hand. The bottle clattered to the ground, still glittering dangerously. Marcus roared in frustration, swinging again with his free hand, but Mr. Knight ducked and pushed him backward. Marcus stumbled, fell, hit the floor hard, and then he stopped moving. Not unconscious, just breathing heavily, staring up at the ceiling, chest heaving, face broken in a way Layla had never seen. For the first time tonight, he looked less like a monster and more like a man who had been drowning for years. The room went quiet. Painfully quiet. Mr. Knight stood there breathing hard, chest rising and falling, knuckles bleeding from the shattered glass. He didn't move toward Marcus. He didn't attack. He didn't yell. He simply stood guard, watching him in case he tried to get up. After almost a full minute, Marcus spoke. His voice was low, cracked. "Everyone leaves me," he whispered. "Everybody." Something inside Layla twisted. Not sympathy, but recognition. Even broken men have origins. Mr. Knight didn't soften, but his voice did. You can't fix what you've broken by causing more damage. Marcus turned his head slowly, looking toward the hallway, toward the bedroom door where Layla and Caden were hiding. Then he shook his head, covered his face with his hands, and whispered, "I don't know how to be a father." Mr. Knight exhaled. "Then learn," he said, "but not like this." Marcus didn't respond. The sirens arrived in the distance. Someone in the building must have called. Maybe a neighbor, maybe the landlord. The flashing lights flickered through the windows a moment later. Layla didn't dare open the door until the voices of officers entered her living room. "Ma'am, you and your son can come out now. It's safe." Layla unlocked the door and rushed out with Caden in her arms. She wasn't prepared for what she saw. Marcus was sitting on the floor with his hands behind his head, as officers spoke to him calmly but firmly. And Mr. Knight. He was standing beside them, quiet, composed, but with worry written across his expression. His shirt torn, knuckles bloody, hair slightly messed, but his presence steady, protective, unshakable. Layla didn't think. She ran straight to him. He wrapped his arms around her instantly, pulling her and Caden close like they were something precious he'd almost lost. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "You're safe now." Layla broke, tears finally poured out uncontrollably. Caden clung to both of them, crying softly, "I thought he was gonna hurt you, Mommy. I thought he was gonna hurt us." Mr. Knight kissed the top of his head gently. "I will never let anyone hurt either of you." The officers escorted Marcus out of the apartment. Before he stepped through the door, he turned around one last time. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was empty, defeated. He looked at Caden with eyes full of regret, then looked away as the door closed behind him. And then the room was silent again. But this time, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. Layla glanced up at Mr. Knight, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" He cupped her face gently with his injured hand. "Now," he said softly, "you heal, you rest. You stop surviving and start living." Layla wiped her tears. "And you?" He smiled, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "I stay if you'll let me." Layla didn't need time to think. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. "You already did." Morning sunlight spilled into the small apartment like a soft whisper of hope, brushing gently across the walls that had witnessed too much chaos the night before. The air felt different, lighter, calmer, almost as if the whole building had exhaled. Layla woke slowly, her eyes opening to the warm glow and the faint hum of the city outside. For a moment she didn't remember. Then everything hit her all at once. The broken door, the shouting, the fight, the sirens, the fear. But the next thing she remembered was the feeling of safety. The feeling of being held. The feeling of not facing everything alone. She turned her head. Mr. Knight was sitting on the sofa across the room, still wearing his slightly torn shirt from last night. His hands were bandaged neatly, probably by one of the officers, but he hadn't gone home. He hadn't slept either. He sat there, quietly watching the sunrise like a man guarding a treasure. And when he noticed Layla waking, he smiled softly. "Morning," he said, voice gentle. Layla tried to sit up, but her body felt sore. From stress, from crying, from holding fear in her muscles overnight. You didn't go home. He shook his head. Didn't want to leave you two alone after everything that happened. Layla swallowed, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't expect. You didn't have to stay. I know, he replied, but I wanted to. Caden woke next, rubbing his eyes, his curls messy on the pillow as he blinked around the room. The moment he saw Mr. Knight, he instantly scrambled off the bed and ran to him. You're still here. Mr. Knight lifted him gently into his lap despite the bandaged hands. Of course I'm still here. Caden hugged him tightly, burying his face into Mr. Knight's chest. Layla watched that moment, watched her son cling to a man who wasn't his father but was becoming something else entirely. Something real, something steady. A knock sounded at the broken doorframe, startling all three of them. It was the landlord, standing awkwardly with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression. I heard what happened, he said. The police gave me the report. I'm so sorry, Layla. We'll get your door replaced today. No charge. Layla blinked, shocked. The landlord wasn't unkind, but he'd never been particularly generous either. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded and glanced at the wrecked door. I'll send the handyman up in an hour. When he left, the apartment fell into a strange quiet again, comfortable but full of things unspoken. Layla walked to the kitchen. She stared at the broken glass scattered across the floor from last night's fight. She stared at the bent coffee table legs. She stared at the splintered pieces of the door. Everything looked like a memory she didn't want to replay, but couldn't forget. Mr. Knight stood and walked over to her. Don't clean any of this, he said gently. I'll handle it. You've already done enough, she whispered. He shook his head. Not even close. She looked at him then, really looked at him. His tired eyes, his loosened tie, his injured hands. And she realized something. He wasn't here out of obligation. He was here because he cared, deeply, maybe more than she was prepared for. Layla, he said softly, you don't have to be strong today. You don't have to pretend this didn't shake you. I'm tired, she admitted. I'm tired of being scared, tired of acting like everything is fine when it's not, tired of pretending I don't need anyone. You don't have to pretend with me. Her breath caught. That was the first moment in years someone had told her she didn't have to carry everything alone. A few hours later, the handyman arrived to replace the door, and Mr. Knight helped with whatever he could. Caden followed him everywhere, talking nonstop, as if the presence of this man turned the apartment into something safer than walls ever could. After the repairs, Mr. Knight insisted on taking them out for breakfast. Layla hesitated. I don't want people to stare, she said quietly. We look like we survived a tornado. Mr. Knight smiled. Then let them stare. I just want you to breathe fresh air. So they went. The little cafe on the corner was warm and quiet, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Caden ate pancakes like he hadn't eaten in days. Layla sat across from Mr. Knight, drinking warm coffee, feeling her heartbeat slowly calm for the first time in weeks. Everything felt normal, and normal felt like a luxury. Mr. Knight watched her with gentle eyes. You're still thinking about him, he said. Layla nodded. Marcus isn't evil, he's broken, but I can't keep letting broken people break me. And you won't, Mr. Knight said. You protected your son, you stood your ground. Yesterday wasn't your fault. None of it was. She looked down at her hands. I'm scared he'll come back. If he does, Mr. Knight said firmly, he'll be dealing with me first. Layla met his eyes and saw something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine before. A future where she wasn't fighting every battle alone. A future where softness wasn't dangerous. Where love wasn't a luxury she couldn't afford. Why do you care so much? She whispered. He stared at her long enough for her heartbeat to speed up. Then he answered with an honesty that made her breath hitch. Because I see you, Layla. I see your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I see a mother fighting the world for her child, and somewhere along the way. He paused, voice softening. I started wanting to be part of that world. Layla's eyes felt warm again, but not from pain this time. What if I let you in? She whispered. What if you get tired of me one day? What if you leave like everyone else? I'm not everyone else, he said quietly. Caden climbed into Layla's lap then, interrupting the moment with a tired little sigh. Mommy, I want him to stay with us always. Layla smiled and kissed the top of his head. Mr. Knight's expression softened completely, like hearing that from Caden meant more than any confession could. After breakfast, they walked back to the apartment together. The day felt brighter. The city felt safer. Life felt possible again. At the door, Mr. Knight turned to Layla. I can stay a few more hours if you want, he said, or I can leave and give you some space. Layla looked at him, at Caden holding his hand with absolute trust, at the new door standing solid and unbroken behind them. You don't have to leave, she said softly, not anymore. He nodded, and she could see the relief in his eyes. When they stepped back inside, Layla saw the apartment differently. It wasn't just a place where fear had lived. It was a place where something new had begun. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale, not perfection, but healing, protectiveness, possibility. Mr. Knight helped Caden set up his toys in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with him despite his injured hands. Layla watched from the doorway, watched the way Caden laughed, the way Mr. Knight gently guided him, the way their worlds were intertwining without force. It felt right. It felt like peace. Later, when Caden napped, Layla found Mr. Knight standing by the window, looking out at the bustling street below. She walked up beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. Thank you, she whispered. He turned to her. For what? For not running when things got ugly. I'm here, he said simply. I'm staying. Layla let out a slow breath she'd been holding for years. She leaned against him, letting her forehead rest lightly on his shoulder. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a storm waiting to hit. It felt like a sunrise, soft, warm, full of promise. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by a rebuilt door, a sleeping child, and a man who chose to stay, Layla realized something powerful. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning again. Life doesn't always give second chances. Often it tests us in ways that feel unfair, cruel, and unstoppable. It forces us to face people who want to hurt us, situations that seem impossible, and choices that weigh on our hearts like stones. But strength isn't about never feeling fear. Strength is showing up even when fear grips you. Strength is protecting the ones you love, standing for truth, and refusing to let the cruelty of others define your worth. Jordan's car was destroyed. Caden's world was threatened. And yet in the aftermath, courage, dignity, and calm rose above the chaos. The story isn't about who had the biggest car, the most power, or the loudest voice. It's about who chose to act with integrity, who stood for what was right, and who refused to let injustice pass silently. True justice doesn't always look like revenge. It looks like accountability. It looks like courage paired with wisdom. It looks like standing firm even when the odds feel stacked against you. And sometimes the real victory isn't in punishment alone. It's in teaching others the value of respect, responsibility, and empathy. In life, we encounter people who believe the world owes them power, who think their anger, their pride, or their privilege allows them to cross lines without consequence. But every action has a ripple effect. Every choice speaks, even when words fail. And those who wield power with calm, fairness, and integrity ultimately shape a world where fear no longer rules. If this story touched you, remember this. Protecting what matters, standing for what's right, and showing courage in the face of intimidation isn't just heroism. It's a statement. It's proof that even in moments of extreme injustice, one person's truth, one person's integrity, can make the difference between fear and safety, despair and hope. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Remind them that courage isn't loud. It's steady, it's persistent, and it always leaves an impact that cannot be burned away. Because at the end of the day, it's not the destruction we face that defines us. It's how we respond. It's how we rise. It's how we protect those who cannot protect themselves. And it's how we choose to stand unwavering in the face of darkness.